much for being here for Rob's Zoom launch. I'm Naomi Foyle. I am a former editor at Waterloo Press and also a poet at Waterloo Press. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Rob tonight and Nude Against a Rock, his fifth collection. As a measure of Rob's kindness, which I know we're all well acquainted with, he's asked me to start off with reading a couple of poems from my forthcoming collection, which is called Salt and Snow, coming out from Waterloo Press in January. It's a collection of elegies, and as today is November 11th, I thought I would read some poems in honor of the peacemakers. Its first poem is called Nowhere Is It Written, Love Must Fail, and it's in memory of the Palestinian poet Refat al-Aria, who was killed in Gaza last December, and whose poem, If I Must Die, you may well have heard of. It's been written on white kites and carried in many demonstrations since his death due to shelling from Israeli forces. The poem is also written after a conversation I witnessed on the internet between Palestinian nonviolent activist Ali Abu Awad and Israeli activist Ami Dar. Nowhere is it written, love must fail. Morgues tortured with corpses. An army sets out to annihilate darkness by the light of white fire, the lamp of bombs, signed by children with hearts and stars. A boy tugs on his brother as witness. I'm dying of hunger. Help us, world. Then stops, turns away, his drained face saying he knows there's no world anymore. Cats eat sniped bodies. Bombed sewers breed disease. Teens in costume hijabs and eyeshadow bruises cackle into cameras, raid fridges, blast showers, gleefully flick electricity switches. Captives shiver. Stripped flesh is currency. Lingerie, loot. A soldier grins, tugs on a bra strap twisted into barbed wire. Black lace ghosts, silk souls, expose his pose. Here, a university, silent all autumn, at last allows a silent vigil, because silence is all we now have in common. Elsewhere, people march, cry justice, peace, freedom, lie on the road wrapped in shrouds and keffirs, light Hanukkah candles in ceasefire menorahs, write on white kites the death of a poet, a tale to be told in every tongue. Here and there, more and more, brave people build bridges from the wreckage of fences, meet above the abyss, try not to look down, but at each other. This poem's called Ways of Seeing Trees. It's in memory of John Berger, who was, I'm very fortunate to say, a mentor of mine in my own work around human justice. It's not well known, perhaps, that he did write poetry as well, and you can find his poetry at Smokestack Books if you're interested in his collected works, poetry. The tongue is the spine's first leaf, you wrote. And if that's true, which it must be, for whenever I repeat your words to myself, I grow taller, taste sap. Then grief, that sour clench in my stomach at the news of your stilled voice, is a burl in my torso, a barked knot of injured grain that warps the birthing ring of this new year, but worked by careful hand may convert a canker into re-enchanted earth, and left to age, give courage birth. It's now my great delight to introduce Robert Hamberger tonight at the Zoom launch of his 5th collection, Nude Against a Rock. The book, another handsome volume from Waterloo Press, is named for its highly charged cover painting and its final stunning sequence of poems, which draws with deep empathy and at times theatrical panache on the journals and paintings of gay British artist Keith Vaughan. The collection also contains a marvelous array of poems about love, family, friends, and contemporary life, beautifully developing the passionate worldview, moral courage, queer erotics, and formal versatility, evident and ever growing in skill and confidence over the arc of Rob's impressive literary career. Rob's literary accomplishments include being shortlisted and highly commended in the Forward Prize, being shortlisted for the Polari Prize for his 4th collection, Blue Wallpaper, winning the 2018 John Murray Future Bookshelf Scheme for his memoir, A Length of Road, Finding Myself in the Footsteps of John Clare, and winning the 2023 London Magazine Poetry Prize for Funny Girl, included in Nude Against a Rock. Rob's work is widely anthologized and published in a vast array of national and international journals, including Poetry Wales, Poetry Salzburg Review, and The Guardian, where his poem, My Husband Falling, was last week's Poem of the Week, published with an insightful appreciation by Carol Woomins. And if you haven't seen that yet, you can search for that on the Guardian website. Altogether, although a far cry from an establishment poet, over his rich career, Rob has firmly established himself, not just as one of Britain's most significant queer poets, but also one of our finest sonneteers and elegists. He is also a poet of witness, with the rare gift of bringing geographically distant suffering as close as a cloud of our own breath on an ice-cold day. Rob indeed has the gift of making the invisible fleetingly visible. Throughout his work, his quietly startling imagery takes root in the heart and lingers in the mind's eye. With his subtle use of rhyme, silence, and speech patterns, he's also a consummate musician of everyday language. Congratulations, Rob, on the publication of Nude Against a Rock, and may it extend your readership far and wide, bringing you the enormous pleasure of the many keen appreciations it deserves.
Thank you. Thank you, Naomi, for such a lovely introduction. That's beautiful to hear. Now, everyone, it's great to see you all, and thank you so much for coming. I'm going to read from Nude Against a Rock, which is, as Naomi said, my 5th collection. It basically has 3 sections, and I'll read a few poems from each section. I'll read for about 20 minutes, and then I think there is a bit of time for a Q&A if people have any questions. The first section is called My Husband Sings. I hope you can all hear me okay. And it has a number of, it has 17 love poems, and I'm going to read 4 of them. This first one is a sonnet. As a lot of you know, I really enjoy writing sonnets. I love the puzzle and the challenge of them. And this first one is called Blue. When I half wake at night and glimpse your back by the dimmest bulb from a far street light, I know I'm safe at last. To light I lack nothing, no one. I should sleep easy, despite unsettled dreams where the old fears quiver their contours. What shadows can I see if our duvet slips down and you shiver? You might even turn over to face me if your private dream allows. But for now, here's the cobalt blue slope of your shoulder, dark hillock of your shoulder blade, furrow along your spine, its cleft of lavender. When my kiss flits your nape, it won't wake you until our room recovers the palest blue. Thank you. This next poem can be quite difficult to read sometimes, but given the election results in America last week, I felt it was quite important to read it, really, just to add my word to the resistance which everyone, both here and in America, is going to need. It's called Love Song for a Bigot. I refuse to disappear. This hand is my complexity. Count its rivers and wedding rings. Marrying a man is my victory, your disgust. If years before I married a woman, that proves the riches of love. See them pour from the unpeopled heavens. I slip like an otter past your nets. Note how various I am. My children carry rivers in their hands. My ancestors lifted doors onto their backs, lifted toddlers and boxes in their arms 200 years ago, tested home against the holes in their boots, the spit of neighbours. I come from heroines who spoke another language. See them climb carefully into rickety boats, measuring safety over every wave and mile, shushing their babies, softly patting their backs, pinning hopes on half an hour's doze. What triumphs! To arrive and think, I'm not welcome here, but that door needs a lick of paint. I'll make it mine. I carry their name, and if you can't pronounce it, if it gutters against your tongue, it's as glorious as my fingerprints, singing for my mouth that shapes it, my ear that answers to it like a perky dog. If whatever I do tonight makes you shudder, you don't need to watch. When I kiss his eyebrow, his shoulder, his dick, it's none of your business. I claim sanctuary in his arms. My door is bolted. I'm an eel and he's my river. Call me Scary Queen or Gully Queen. Quote Leviticus, its abominations. Answer me with your machete. It's nothing personal. Stop me seeing my child, my grandchild. I might infect them with my love. Build 1,000 walls to block me. I'll find 1,000 rivers to swim. Thank you. Now, the next one is, or was, the Guardian poem of the week last week, so I have to read it. This is called My Husband Falling. Time trips you like a pavement, says, I'll show you what falling's for. It's a stony lesson, cuts to lip and wrist and knee, where skin meets slabs. The solicitude of women, a man's joke about brandy, your younger husband lifting you, using both hands to balance your weight, raise you to your feet, ensure you stand upright again, planted in your shoes, as if falling becomes improbable. though time might be riding to trip you once more, chiding you to steady yourself. Slow down. What are hands for but to save you from falling? What are cuts for but to show why blood travels under your skin? See how quickly falling proves our fragility, precious as breath, as gold. Thank you. And just picking up on the last word of that poem, the word gold. This is another sonnet. It's the last one I'll read from this section of love poems, and it's called New Gold. You lost your wedding ring in hospital. Your fingers thinned. It slipped somewhere. So I'll marry you again, right here. While the jeweler jokes she wanted to kill her husband after 3 years. I will inch this new gold onto your third finger, left hand, over nail, ridge, joint, forever circled. She's our witness when I say, all that I am, I give to you as my vow. Yours looks shinier than mine. We place our hands together to compare, to show how the years etch rings and skin. We face whatever comes, old romantics, husbands now, like the first night I found you, felt your voice. So that's from the first section, thank you, of love poems. And the next section, the middle section, is called Anything in the World. And I'm going to start with the poem that won the London Magazine Poetry Prize last year. It's called Funny Girl, and I need to warn you that there are two lines in the poem that I'm going to sing. It's based on the 1970s musical Funny Girl with Barbra Streisand and Omar Sharif, and it's a memory poem, Funny Girl. On the brink of my teens at the Dominion, I watch with my mother through the black. Omar and Barbara glow against our faces, sing, you are woman, I am man, in that heart-red boudoir on a 60-foot screen. Omar's dinner jacket, clipped moustache, brown eyes bigger than my head. Barbara's piled up hair, blue diamante matching her fan, sway me with their duet. I'm slinking inside their embrace. She surrenders the swan of her neck, shuts her lilac shadow eyes. Omar gathers her in his arms, croons, does it take more explanation than this? My mother knows who's woman, who's man, though she's still trying to be father and mother, fill the shape of his gap. Is this how men serenade women, who find it so absurd it makes them laugh? I want to unbuckle their clothes, bow tie at the throat, blue diamante, unfold whoever's softer to the touch, his hand or hers, my finger to lips, sense when it's night, his mouth on mine. It's a feeling I like feeling very much. When no one's watching, I risk being woman and man, wriggle between their voices, blur before their smoky gaze. My skin a swan's feather, prickling at the wing. I burst into flames with this feeling, all the time sitting silent in my singed and secret dark. Thank you. This next one is another sonnet. There are a number of poems, both about family, but also about porous borders. My own view is that borders should always be porous. This is called Rain in Istanbul. She tells me there's rain in Istanbul, so I buy an umbrella for my daughter the day before she flies again. I figure black with small pink butterflies will open beautifully outside the hotel, each splash fizzling like the wettest fire. She says, I want to go everywhere. My fear can't clip her wings. May this frail umbrella shelter her from harm in Paris, New York, Honduras, Thailand. My undaunted daughter flies safely home 5 days later. Rain fell outside the Grand Bazaar, the Blue Mosque, the baths, where a balm of water dropped soft coins into her hand. Thank you. Now, the next one, there are a number of poems about my mother, and this is called another sonnet, and it's called My Mother Ironing. She taught me the best way to iron a shirt, and I follow her faithfully, easing along the collar, nudging across each hurt and crumpled sleeve, the pleats uncreasing, while my hand glides to smooth both cuffs, as if this iron might solve every buttonhole, calm those puckered stitches. Heat buffs its prow over rucked material. What kind of father am I? My kids sewn into their years, did I show them how to iron, or was it something left undone? I stand at the ironing board and don't know what to do, except hang another shirt in a room emptied of my mother. And I've become interested in prose poems. There are four prose poems in Nude Against a Rock, and this is one of them. It's called Golden Bomber Jacket. You left your golden bomber jacket in my car. We were walking through clear streets under trees. I was telling you about my 90 poems. We came to a garden where I introduced you to my new friend while she was tying back stems, pruning roses. After we chatted and left her, you said, she's beautiful. We ran towards more roses, pulling their blousy faces close to ours. We jumped on a bed on the lawn, laughing with children we'd never met before. When we sat in the crowded cafe, you excused yourself to pop to the toilet. We hadn't ordered, so I waited for you. I waited for several minutes while families chatted and ate their strawberry tarts. I waited until it dawned on me that you wouldn't be coming back because you died 30 years ago. Thank you. Now I'm going to end with three poems from the title sequence. As Naomi said, it's a sequence about the gay British painter Keith Vaughan. He was quite a tormented soul, really. He suffered a great deal from the societal homophobia, and that probably affected him with internalized homophobia as well. But he also, at the same time, paradoxically, his main subject was the male form, the male nude, and also landscapes. So he was still celebrating both maleness and, in my view, his sexual identity. I'm going to start by reading a poem that is sparked off by his experiences in the war. I should say two things. One is that they're virtually all written in the imagined voice of Keith Vaughan, and also each poem starts with the title of one of his paintings or drawings or photographs. He was a great photographer of men, basically. He was also a conscientious objector during the Second World War, and he worked as a non-combatant for the Army Medical Corps, and this is one of his experiences. He kept a journal from 1939 until his death in 1977, and a great number of the poems begin with epigraphs from Keith Vaughan's journal. This is a quotation from his journals on the 19th of June, 1940. The poem is called Len Eating a Melon, and it's from a photograph on Pagham Beach that he took in summer 1939. In his journal, he wrote, his arms finished at the wrists in two logs of yellow stained wool and bandage. His right leg was a shapeless embalmment of bandage. Pain too long endured bent him backwards like a strung bow, fretting his face with sweat. Last summer, my nude stood easy in the sun, that shush of tide, blue after blue, absorbed by a half-moon slice, the prospect of taste so close, one succulent drop quivered at his fingernail. Tonight, I tend a soldier from Dunkirk, wanting to soothe his wounds like a steady mother. Midnight's damage howls fissures into skin, pulpy flesh looped by bandages where his hands should be. I can't sew a stitch. His wrists blunt logs, his thigh a dingy yellow hidden from the sun. I'm unable to mend. The beach man, careless for any juice to smear his chin. The bandaged man, stained beyond repair. Their glorious bodies singing, live, live. I staunch his blots, keep dabbing, mopping, while my young man smiles softly above a melon, eager to bite. The next poem is the title poem, so it tries to develop this cover. Sorry, I'm doing that wrong. It tries to describe the cover, Nude Against a Rock. And again, it's written in Keith Vaughan's words or imagined voice. In August 1958, he wrote in his essay, Painter's Progress, these compositions rely on the assumption, hard to justify perhaps, but nonetheless real to me, that the human figure, the nude, is still a valid symbol for the expression of man's aspirations and reactions to the life of his time. When I stand my nude against a rock, who wins? The nude scores on softness, sleek as a man able to be gentle, worthy of love. If his hand rests to steady himself beside the black bulk, it doesn't mean he believes stone is stronger than skin, armor the toughest way to survive. I pitch the body against blocks, boulders and monoliths, somewhere near the sea, under pewter cloud. What a weight he carries on his shoulders. This gilt sun travels across his nipples, torso, groin, glinting patches of pistachio and coral, even pearl. I'll balance my final touches with a truce, each leaning on the other. That crag cushions his shoulder when he tilts his chin. Shadows crosshatch their stony valley. This man rises like a vulnerable answer, always saying yes. And this is the last poem I'll read tonight. It's towards the end of the sequence. In his last year or so, Keith Vaughan basically gave up painting. He was very ill from cancer and he lost the impetus to paint. He also had bought a small cottage in Essex in an area called Harrow Hill. And this is a painting called Harrow Hill in March. And in his journals on the 27th of March 1977, Keith Vaughan wrote, "Grey and drizzling with rain, but the trees are in bud, and there is the look, though not the feeling, of spring. The very idea of painting again nauseates me. There is nothing I want to do except sleep, oblivion. Lilac sky with an absence of cloud almost sustains me. Lines fence me in against rain, but the point of my roof can't protect me. Life opens one black window where I'm calling goldfinches, sparrows and starlings, even wanting a heron's grey cry. Anything to sing me to sleep. I'll hang on to this green diagonal, sloping grass, lit between trees." That's the end of the reading. Thank you very much.
I wonder if we could be unmuted, everyone. Simon can unmute us so that we could give Rob a rousing round of applause.
Well, thank you. It's very kind. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So we're going to have time for some questions. I thought I might kick off. That's just such a compelling, tender reading. The poems all just evoke this tangible intimacy. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you shaped the collection as a whole. It's in the three parts, and then obviously in the last part we moved to Vaughan's voice. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the relationship between the parts.
Well, I mean, you helped, Naomi, with your your suggestion, because basically I knew I wanted different sections, but initially I'd in fact scattered the love poems through the collection. And I think your suggestion was to start with the love poems, with a positive gay relationship, and in a sense, therefore, the Keith Vaughan poems would be a reflection on someone who didn't have the freedoms that I have. So I think there probably is a balance between the two. And then in the middle section, I really wanted to examine family, examine song, and the idea of both borders and the chaos that nature is in. I
Mm.
wanted to
Mm.
weave a number of different themes, really. And I think some of those themes come back in the Keith Vaughan sequence. He was a great lover of landscape. He did, I think, see nature as a haven, really. Um, and again, looking at love, he did fall in love. He felt quite tormented by that sometimes. But I do admire him, and I wanted to show someone who could be writing or creating about gay identity and also writing very honestly in his journals. So yeah, my themes, I think, are around different themes around love, really, in various ways. Love for our partners and family, and also love for art and for nature.
And there's a sense of the home there, really, isn't there? Being at home in the world, how we make this
Yes,
welcoming dwelling place.
I hope so. I hope that's certainly something I was aiming for, really.
Mhm. Well, I think it's a beautifully balanced. I was honestly was not fishing for a compliment there. I'd kind of forgotten that was actually I'd had anything to do with that at all. But it does really strike me thinking about the title now, how Vaughan was in a sense against a rock and a hard place, and you seem
Sure.
to be able to, although that shadow of that rock is still there, of that shame that was projected onto gay people
Yeah.
um, so long, and still a threat, and a physical threat as well in terms of homophobia. How you seem to be able to maybe move, moving beyond that now in your life and in your work, and the way that you encourage others and anthologized, for example, in books that young gay people and queer people will be reading as they're coming up. Um, so wonderful to have all these poems collected. So maybe just one more question. And now that it's here, I mean, you obviously want to celebrate it, but what are you working on now? I know poems always, collections tend to take years to come together. So do you find that you're going deeper into the themes or perhaps broadening into new themes?
Yes, I just love poems are still coming, so that's good. And a few sonnets are still coming. I'm also working on a second memoir, which
Hmm.
is sort of in its later drafts. So I'm trying to balance the prose and poetry, really, if I can. But it does feel like um, a, a celebration to have this work gathered together, and I'm delighted with the Waterloo Press and how they've supported me, really. And the book looks great. I'm really
Mhm.
very pleased with it, and very pleased that we were able to use a Keith Vaughan painting from his estate.
Yes, it feels to me like I hope the estate, realizes what kind of gold actually they have in this collection, and maybe there might be opportunities for you to read with the paintings. I think that would be wonderful.
I mean, that would be
I know that the
amazing.
John
Yeah.
Clare Society's welcomed you, haven't they?
They
So
have, they
yeah.
have, yes.
Marion's asked a question on that point. Were the Keith Vaughan poems inspired more from his paintings or his journals?
Yes, that's interesting. I'd always loved his paintings. There's a sort of melancholy and a sense of isolation in them, but I loved what he was doing in these semi-abstracted forms of the male body. But then when I read his journals, they felt a bit like a gift, really, to a poet because he was also working with words. And I think he wanted the journal to be known. He was quite honest about that. He even published edited extracts of it in 1966, which was incredibly brave of him, really, because he does, in a sense, come out in those in the first published journals as a gay man. And obviously, then it was still illegal. It was before the partial decriminalisation of homosexuality. So I think to have a visual artist who was also a writer felt like something I couldn't resist, really. I hope that answers that question.
Yes, thanks, Rob.
Have any other questions come up in the chat, or does anyone want
Yeah,
to
there's one
just
from Dave.
Oh yes, so Dave Wakely has asked, for someone whose writing primarily addresses the world in first person, how challenging or refreshing was it to write poems that give voice to someone else? That's a really good question, Dave. I like writing in the voice of other people. I did it with the John Clare poems in From a Length of Road, my previous book, and it somehow challenges your own usual styles. It begins to push you in interesting directions, I think, both with imagery and with rhythm and tone of voice. So I think it was a useful freedom to me. And the other thing I made a conscious decision to do was to only write one sonnet in the whole of the sequence. So I also wanted to explore free verse and each poem finding its own form. So in the 28 poems of the final sequence, there's only one sonnet written in the voice or imagined voice of Keith Vaughan's mother, because I felt she was quite a rigid personality, and I wanted to put a female voice in there, but I wanted it to be within a structured form. None of the others are. There are two poems from his lover and muse, Johnny Walsh, and a poem from a man who was effectively Keith Vaughan's husband, although it certainly wasn't a happy marriage. But that's Ramsay McClure. So there are four voices in the sequence. But yeah, I enjoyed saw it as a positive challenge to write in another voice.
That's also something could go in a direction like verse drama, couldn't it? In a way, or
Absolutely.
radio. Yeah, it's an interesting start, perhaps, for you.
And I see there's a
Yes,
question
yes. So
from.
I think it's probably my job. Sorry, I was a bit derelict there. I think I will read this question out for you, Rob. So from Louis, such marvelous work, Robert. Love the poem My Mother Ironing. I'm curious about how you found the process of writing this book of poems a lot about your life alongside writing your memoir. Has there been a crossover of themes or collected stories?
Thanks, Louis. That's a really interesting question. Um, I think there is a crossover. The memoir is obviously telling my life story, but in a different way to the poems. I think the poems hone in on particular details. And certainly since my mother died, I found that memories of her that apparently are inconsequential come back with extra force, really. And I think I've always seen the sonnet as a way of containing what could be chaotic emotions. So, yeah, I hope there is a crossover between my poetry and prose. I like the different challenges of both forms, really. Now, there's another question there from
There's
Caroline. Is
another
that
question.
right?
There's a
Yeah,
question also that came before, which is from Caroline, who
yeah.
asks, is the sonnet your favorite poetic form? How do you go about writing sonnets?
It probably is my favorite poetic form. I don't write in many other forms. I tried a villanelle and I like the challenge of specular poems, those sort of mirror poems. I've written a couple of those. But how do you go about it? It's interesting. Often I think the poem will begin to insist within the first few lines that it might want to be a sonnet. It's probably about attending to what the poem is trying to tell you. Every now and then I've got that wrong, and in fact, the poem doesn't want to be a sonnet, and I start off thinking it does, and it resists the shape or the rhymes or the scheme that I'm trying to fit it into. So I am trying to get better at listening to the form that the poem chooses to be. I hope I'm getting better at that the more experienced I am. Um, yeah.
Well, the next question actually kind of goes a little deeper into that. It's from Hong Wei. I hope I've said your name right, Hong Wei. It's asking, well, first of all, compliment, love your poems, Robert. Thank you for the inspiration. Regarding your decision to write prose poems, how do you decide which or what topics are better suited for the form of prose poetry?
Yes,
This is
that's
a particular
really
question, isn't it?
interesting.
Yeah.
I think what's happened with each of the prose poems is that they, in fact, started as a journal entry. I keep a journal. I've kept a journal on and off since I was about 15. And sometimes a journal entry, I've just started to think, maybe this is moving into something that's outside the journal. So I then rewrite it and begin to think about the imagery and the rhythm. That certainly happened with the four prose poems that are in this collection. So I don't make a conscious decision. I again just try and allow the writing to show me the form that it wishes to become. I know that sounds a bit mystical, but I think there is something about the mysterious nature of writing poetry where we have to attend to the form. We have to listen and be respectful and be the servant of the words rather than the master, if that makes sense. I hope that helps.
Yeah. Anyone who's asked questions want to follow up on any particular perspective or any new questions? Well, I think we've. Oh, yes, here we go. How do you know when from Gilly Griffin? How do you know when you are done a poem and or the section of the book?
Yes, I mean, certainly knowing when you've done a poem for me is when it stops niggling at you and nagging you to change it. And sometimes that takes weeks, sometimes months. And of course, every now and then it'll come back a year later and you'll suddenly think, wait a minute, that bit's not right. And obviously getting the poems together as a book made me look again at at every line and every phrase. And Naomi was again very helpful with just saying that bit could do a bit more work or have a think about this image or phrase. And then, as regards the section of the book, in a sense, the love poems were inevitable once Naomi suggested that I consider holding them together as a group. They then formed a sort of narrative arc, really, over the 17 poems. And then with the middle section, I wanted to have a sense of the different themes interweaving between each other. I wanted there to be a porous border within the book itself, really, or porous borders. So the themes cross over each other in the middle section, and then in the final section, I basically used a chronology. I just went from the first entry in Keith Vaughan's journal to the final entry, and then use different artworks to give me my imagery and my sense of story, really. I hope that answers that.
Well, I suppose having worked with memoir, you probably, focusing on narrative arcs may have fed your sense of narrative in poetry.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I don't know how people read collections. I do read them from, page 1 to page 80 or whatever. I do read them consecutively, but some people don't, of course. They dip in and out. So we tend to assume it's going to be read as a whole collection, and that might be, we might be being yeah, we might be being naive or hopeful about that.
Well, speaking of pristine endings, Hongwei has another question. The book has exactly 100 pages. Was it a coincidence or by design?
It was coincidence, but of course I was absolutely delighted. I knew it would be 90 poems. I knew it was going to be a large collection. But yeah, when the printer came back with 100 pages, it was just perfect, really. As if it was meant to be.
A ton of love.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank
Anyone
you.
else? Yeah. Or is, yeah. Any final questions? Can we have one more poem, Rob?
Oh wow, one more poem. Okay, let me think. I'll do. I've just opened it at Knitting Pattern, which is
Mm-hmm.
another poem about my mother. Um, so Knitting Pattern. Why have I saved her handwriting? A lined page, pencil words, one knit, five main, five navy, 26 main, two green, four main, six green, five main. I don't know the code, but she knew. Now her ashes sift where minnows open mouths, and water moves above her. I don't understand that either. It's her message. Two pearl, four main, nine green, two main, two green, 24 main, 10 navy, two main. I don't know how to stitch one colour after the other, add one word to the next, though I persevere. A pencil over this page, the sign of her hand once moving. I want her to be in the air again, beside me, knitting or talking. I won't look away this time, her needles clicking like minutes. One main, 12 navy, 23 main. Thank you.
Thank you. We can all just give a final round of applause.
Thank you all for listening. Been
Thank you very much. Yeah,
great
and
to
thank you
see
to
you all.
Simon. Thank you to Simon for handling all the zoomy stuff in the background. That's much
Thank you,
appreciated.
Simon.
Thank you, Simon Madrell.
And thank you to Waterloo Press for the book. I'm delighted with it.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to see you all.
Yeah, you too.
Really good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to Naomi as well as Rob.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
You too.
And do buy the book, of course.
Yes, will do.
Will the recording be available at all?
We hope it will. Simon and Naomi and I need to try and get ourselves organised with that. But if it is, I will let you send you all the link.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much for coming. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Rob. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.